What happens when a liberal student tries to shut down opposing views at a university, only to be confronted by someone no one expected? Barron Trump himself? What started as a fiery debate turned into something no one on campus could ignore. Before we begin the story, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers soon. Your support is the motivation that drives us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. It was the kind of morning where even the sunshine felt curated, warm enough to be pleasant, but sharp enough to remind you that fall had arrived. The quad at Redwood University buzzed with voices, folding chairs, and clipboard-wielding students in branded t-shirts. Flyers flapped in the breeze like impatient questions. How old is too old to lead? Is democracy stuck in the past? Inside the central auditorium, rows of seats filled quickly, the air humming with anticipation. Today's statewide student debate had drawn in more than just Redwood students. Dozens had traveled from nearby colleges, curious to witness the firebrand who was about to take the stage. Sophia Lane was already a name on every student's tongue. Tall, sharp-featured, and fiercely articulate, she was known for never backing down. Her words were scalpel-precise and just as cold. Dressed in an all-black suit that looked more courtroom than campus, she stepped up to the microphone, not to greet the crowd, but to challenge them. "I'll be brief," she said, voice steady, cutting through the room like a knife through glass. "If we truly care about progress, about moving forward, not backward, then we need to talk about the real obstacle, the grip of the over 50 generation on our democracy. It's time they let go, step aside, retire from influence." A few gasps, a smattering of unsure murmurs, then, slowly, the applause rolled in. It started in the front rows, mostly students in Sophia's circle, but it spread quickly. Some clapped out of agreement, others out of peer pressure. Either way, the momentum was hers now. Toward the back of the auditorium, Barron Trump sat still. He wore a dark blue sweater, one sleeve pushed up just enough to show a faded wristwatch, the kind someone wore out of habit more than need. His hair was a little longer than usual, his expression unreadable. Most students didn't recognize him at first glance, or didn't know what to make of him. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, he certainly wasn't popular, but those who did know him often kept their opinions quiet, either out of respect, uncertainty, or fear of judgment. Barron wasn't here to debate. He hadn't signed up to speak. In fact, he'd only come because a professor had quietly nudged him to attend, just to listen. But now, as Sophia's words echoed through the auditorium, something in him tensed. A few seats away, an older man, gray hair, denim jacket with a military patch, shifted uncomfortably. He was one of Redwood's older students, a retired Army medic who'd enrolled to finish a degree he'd once abandoned decades ago. His name was Charles. Sophia's comment had landed like a slap to the face. As the crowd filed out for a short break, a group of younger students circled Charles near the exit. "Hey man," one said, laughing lightly, "guess you better start packing it in." "Huh? Time's up for the old folks." Charles didn't answer. His jaw clenched. His hands were trembling slightly. Not from age, but from trying to stay calm. Barron saw it all. He didn't speak. He didn't step in. Not yet. But under the folding chair in front of him, his hand curled into a fist, tight and deliberate. The room might have applauded Sophia Lane, but something far deeper than politics had just been cracked open. The lights dimmed slightly as the host of the debate stepped aside, her voice fading into the hush of anticipation. Sophia Lane rose with a practiced poise, papers in one hand, tablet in the other. Her heels clicked softly against the wooden stage, but it wasn't the sound of her steps that drew attention, it was the way she carried herself. Like someone who already knew she was right. She didn't waste time on introductions. "The data is clear," she began, her voice steady, her gaze sweeping across the room. 74% of congressional seats are held by individuals over the age of 55. Yet, this group represents less than a third of our population. Is that democracy or stagnation? A few scattered claps, then more, as she leaned forward slightly, letting her words settle. "I'm not here to be polite," she continued, her tone sharpening. "The truth is, our system is hostage to outdated minds. Neuroscience shows that cognitive flexibility, The ability to adapt to new ideas declines with age. That's not ageism. That's biology. Now the applause was louder. More confident. Heads nodded. A few students even whistled in agreement. And if we want meaningful progress, she said, voice rising just enough to cut through the noise, then we must re-evaluate who gets to shape the future. I propose we retire the old model, literally. No voting rights or public office positions for individuals over 50. They've had their time. Now it's ours. It was bold. It was brutal. And the crowd ate it up. Phones lit up as students began live tweeting. A few faculty members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, lips tight but unmoving. Near the left aisle, a gray-haired professor stared down at his folded hands. Even some of the older attendees in the back began whispering to each other, their postures shrinking under the weight of the moment. Then it happened. A student in a plaid shirt leaned toward the professor, chuckling under his breath but loud enough for a few rows to hear. Maybe it's time you hang it up. Teach. Let us run things for a change. The professor said nothing, but his fingers clenched slightly on the armrest. Across the room, Barron watched. His arms remained crossed, his expression unchanged, but his eyes moved, first to Sophia, then slowly across the audience. He saw the grins, the clapping, the subtle winces. The divide wasn't just political. It was generational, and it was growing sharper by the second. Something shifted in him. He remembered a conversation with his father, quiet, over coffee. Years ago, they'd talked about moments that mattered. Not the ones you plan for, but the ones that happen when no one expects you to speak. Barron had never wanted the spotlight. His name alone drew too much of that. But this wasn't about him anymore. Beside him, a student, dark hair, thick-rimmed glasses, glanced over and whispered, "Aren't you gonna say something? I thought you were the kind of guy who called this stuff out." Barron didn't answer. He just stood. He didn't rush. He didn't raise a hand or look around for permission. He moved down the side aisle quietly, slipping past rows of heads turned toward Sophia's side of the stage. No one noticed him at first. Not until he reached the back of the room, where a microphone had been placed for audience participation. The feed from the live stream, which had been focused tightly on Sophia, flicked, just briefly, to the second camera, capturing a tall figure stepping up to the mic. Someone near the front whispered, "Is that?" Another student sat up straighter, eyes widening. Barron adjusted the microphone with one hand, took a breath, and looked directly at the stage. Sophia's smile faltered for just a second. Not fear, just surprise. He didn't speak right away. The room began to hush again. And in that silence, the tension shifted, not shattered, but bending, like a wire pulled tight. Something was about to change, and everyone could feel it. Barron stood still for a moment, hands at his sides, eyes steady. From the back of the auditorium, it wasn't immediately clear who he was to the students up front, but whispers spread quickly, like a lit match dropped into dry grass. "That's him," someone murmured. "The Trump kid. No way, he actually showed up?" Sophia's expression didn't shift much. She tilted her head, her lips parting slightly in a restrained smirk. But there was a flicker in her eyes, a brief pause in her breath, just enough to betray that she hadn't expected this. Not from him. A staff member near the edge of the stage leaned in to speak with a debate moderator. They conferred quickly, then nodded toward the microphone where Barron stood. The rules were clear. Open forum meant anyone could speak. No exceptions. The moderator cleared her throat. "We have a participant from the audience. Please keep your remarks under 3 minutes." Barron stepped closer, adjusted the mic. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. "I didn't come here to speak today. I came to listen." A few students chuckled. Someone in the third row muttered, "Too late for that." He ignored it. "I've heard a lot about progress this morning. About how the world needs to change. How we need to move forward. I don't disagree, but there's something dangerous about the way we define that word, progress." The room, so loud minutes ago, grew quieter. Not silent, not yet, but the noise dimmed. "I don't oppose change," he said. "What I oppose is pretending that exclusion is the same thing as evolution. When you say people over 50 should no longer vote or hold office, not because of what they've done, but simply because of when they were born, that's not progress. That's prejudice." A few heads turned. Some of the clapping hands from earlier now lay still in laps. Sophia's smile faded, just a little. Barron kept going, his tone steady, unhurried. You mentioned neuroscience, so let's talk about wisdom. About experience. Let's talk about Nelson Mandela, who became president at 75. Or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who served until the end of her life, shaping generations of legal thought. Or Toni Morrison, who published one of her most important works at 62. He looked out over the crowd, not at anyone in particular, but with a gaze that landed like weight on the room. You claim older generations can't relate to the young. But empathy doesn't disappear with age. It disappears when we stop listening. And if we silence voices just because they come with wrinkles or slower steps, then we've lost the very principle we claim to protect. Sophia's fingers curled slightly around her notes. Her posture didn't change, but her eyes scanned the crowd more often now. Barron continued, voice a touch firmer. There's a difference between challenging old ideas and discarding the people who hold them. We talk about inclusion, but what you propose isn't inclusive. It's convenient exclusion, dressed up as justice. A pause. Then, the line that cracked the silence. You're asking for tolerance, but denying it to those who think differently. That's not progress. That's bias. In a modern costume. The room was still. Even the students who had been recording lowered their phones slightly. Not out of boredom, but because they realized something unexpected was happening. In the third row, a professor with silver hair and a tweed blazer blinked back tears. He whispered, mostly to himself, it's been a long time since I saw a student speak truth in a place built on pretense. No one moved. Then, somewhere from the middle rows, a single clap, then two, then a slow ripple of applause that moved through the room like a changing wind. It wasn't the thunderous kind. Not yet, but it was real, sincere. Sophia didn't sit down, but her arms crossed tighter. Her jaw set differently. And Barron? He simply stepped away from the mic. Eyes forward, not smiling, not waiting for approval, just walking back to his seat, leaving behind a room that suddenly felt less certain of everything it had just cheered for. Sophia stepped off the stage without a word, heels clicking against the polished floor. Her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. She didn't wait for the applause to die down. She didn't look back at the audience or at Barron. She headed straight for the backstage door. Her friends closed behind her like a protective wall. Inside the green room, the atmosphere shifted. The buzz of victory that usually followed her wasn't there. Instead, there was silence, punctuated only by the muffled sounds of the crowd outside. Sophia threw her notes onto the couch, paced a few steps, then turned sharply. Well, she said, trying to sound composed. That was unexpected. No one responded right away. Ethan, the lanky sophomore who'd once dubbed her the future senator, cleared his throat. I mean, Barron. He didn't exactly say anything wrong. He offered carefully, eyes flicking to the others for support. Sophia turned to him slowly, as if processing his words one syllable at a time. Excuse me? She asked, her voice flat. I'm just saying, Ethan said, holding up his hands. He wasn't attacking you. He was calm, thoughtful. People responded to that. She stared at him. Then, with a sudden force, she reached out and pushed the door open. Get out, she said. Ethan hesitated, then backed away without a word. The door clicked shut behind him. Her fingers trembled. She sank into the edge of the couch, trying to steady her breath. Her eyes drifted to a poster on the wall, an old image of a civil rights march. The irony didn't escape her, but she wasn't in the mood for reflection. Still, memory crept in. She was 10 again, sitting at the dinner table, her father's voice booming over everyone else's. You don't talk back to adults. Sophia, we've lived more. We know more. That's final. Her mother hadn't said a word, just kept slicing carrots while Sophia's small hands balled into fists under the table. That night, she wrote her first journal entry. When I grow up, I'll never let anyone older tell me I'm less. She'd built her entire identity on that vow. Now, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she'd misunderstood the enemy. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It opened slightly, and Professor Green stepped in. He was in his 70s. A quiet man who had taught political ethics at Redwood longer than Sophia had been alive. He didn't lecture her. He simply walked in, sat across from her, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. I once believed the young were always right, he said, but then I watched them repeat mistakes we thought we'd buried. Pride looks the same in any generation. He left without waiting for a reply. Across campus, Barron sat in the student union lounge, still in the clothes he'd worn on stage. He wasn't used to attention like this. People he didn't know nodded as they passed. A girl handed him a note folded neatly in half. He opened it. "You didn't just argue," it read. "You reminded us that dignity doesn't expire with age. Thank you." He folded the note again. Quietly. Then his phone buzzed. A message from someone named Owen. He couldn't place the name. Read, "You just gave my mom her voice back. She cried watching your speech." Barron exhaled, slowly. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt responsible, like the spotlight had found him. And he couldn't just walk away. Back in the green room, Sophia opened her laptop. Her inbox was flooded. Not hate mail, not support either, just links, one after another. The video was everywhere now. Clips of Barron's speech had already been edited, shared, captioned. The quiet voice that silenced the noise. One headline read, "Another post had thousands of likes. He spoke for our parents when they couldn't be in the room." Then she saw it. A comment that stopped her cold. She wanted to erase our moms and dads from the system. And the boy she used to mock just made her speechless. Her face didn't move, not at first. But something cracked, not in her expression, not in her voice. Somewhere deeper. She sat in silence, staring at the screen as the room dimmed around her. For the first time since she'd stepped onto a stage, she didn't know what to say. Sophia hadn't been seen on campus since the debate. Her usual corner seat in the political theory class sat empty. The fire in her stride, the sharp lift of her chin, gone. Her dorm room lights stayed off most of the day. Blinds drawn tight. A sticky note on her door read, "Not in the mood for opinions." Inside, she sat cross-legged on her bed, laptop open, cursor blinking on a blank screen. Her phone buzzed every few minutes. But she didn't look. She'd locked down her social media the night before. Too many comments, too many faces she once inspired now questioning her. Some with sympathy, most with disappointment. Still, one voice kept replaying in her head. Softer now, but steady like the hum of something unresolved. "I don't oppose progress. I oppose using the name of progress to exclude those who are different." Barron's words clung to the walls of her silence. She hated how calm he'd sounded, how unshakable, but most of all, she hated that something in her had agreed. A knock on the door pulled her back. Then another. She stayed still. "Sophia, it's Ethan," came the voice, cautious but firm. No answer. "I printed something for you." The envelope slid under her door. Footsteps faded. She waited. Then, after a moment too long to justify as curiosity, she leaned down and pulled it toward her. It was a stack of papers, dozens of printed comments, emails, and anonymous reflections from older students at Redwood. She recognized one name, Ms. Calderon, a 61-year-old returning student who had spoken at last year's diversity panel. "I walked into that auditorium feeling proud to still be learning at my age." The comment read, "I walked out feeling like my presence was a burden." Sophia's throat tightened. Another line, scribbled by hand at the top of a page. "My daughter goes to this school. She's 22. Last night she asked if she should stop listening to me, because my opinions are too old. What are we teaching them?" She stood, grabbed the papers, and tore them in half. Then she stared at the pieces on the floor. Quietly, without ceremony, she bent down and gathered them back into a pile. She sat again, reading every page until the sun dipped beneath the window, casting long shadows across her desk. Later that day, in a classroom she and Barron shared, the professor, a soft-spoken woman with salt and pepper curls, closed her lecture notes early. "I want to speak for a few minutes," she said, her voice carrying a different weight today. "About free speech and responsibility." The class shifted, eyes met, but no one said a word. "We live in a time where speaking out is encouraged," she continued, "but the real courage is in listening, especially when it challenges us." She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. Even those who'd clapped the loudest 2 days ago stared at their desks. Meanwhile, across campus, Barron walked quietly into the lounge of the Continuing Education Center. He had declined the invitation to speak, but curiosity had pulled him in. He sat in the back, blending in with the older students, many of whom had graying hair, some walking with canes or holding notebooks that looked older than some of the undergrads. A woman 2 rows ahead turned to him during a break. "Are you him?" she asked. Not unkindly. He nodded. "My grandson is 15. He said your speech reminded him of his grandfather. That meant something to me." Barron didn't know what to say, so he smiled. After the session, he made his way toward the exit when a voice called behind him. "You mind if I walk with you?" It was Marcus, Sr. Black, one of Sophia's former strongest allies. The same Marcus who once told Barron to check his privilege during a freshman orientation event. "Sure," Barron said. They walked a while without speaking. "You know," Marcus said, "I never thought someone like you could see people like me." Barron raised an eyebrow. "But that day, when you talked about being excluded, about people being dismissed because they don't fit the moment's narrative, I realized you weren't just talking about age." Barron looked over. "Maybe we've both been misreading each other." Marcus chuckled. "Yeah, maybe we've all been misreading more than that." That night, in the campus library, Sophia sat alone at a back table. In front of her were pages, her original speech, printed and annotated in her handwriting. The notes looked different now. Defensive, sharp, certain. She read them like a stranger. Then, on the final page, in the corner where she once scrawled, "Truth equals progress," she picked up a pencil and wrote something new. "Is inclusion about removing others, or starting with yourself?" She stared at the question, not as a challenge, but as the start of something she hadn't written yet. The email had gone out that morning, a quiet line among a dozen campus announcements. All student participants of the state debate are invited to a follow-up debrief. Friday at 4 p.m. Room 201, Redwood Hall. Most people would have skimmed right past it, but Sophia didn't. She stared at it for a long moment. Her cursor hovered over the decline button. Her gut told her to walk away. Avoid the room. Avoid the stairs. But her hand, almost against her will, clicked, accept. By the time Friday afternoon rolled around, Redwood Hall felt like a different place than it had on debate day. There were no banners or livestream cameras this time, just folding chairs arranged in a wide circle. A whiteboard at the front, and a pot of stale coffee sitting on a back table. Sophia walked in alone. She wore a plain gray sweater, jeans, and no makeup. Her hair was tied back, not in her usual confident bun but in something messier, looser. She chose a seat near the far wall, eyes low, back straight. No one from her usual group sat beside her. A few minutes later, Barron entered. He glanced around quietly and chose a chair near the corner. Not far from Sophia, but not too close either. For a second, their eyes met. Nothing was said, just a flicker of recognition. Then each returned to their own thoughts. Professor Whitley, known to most as just Dr. W., stood at the front with a clipboard. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried weight. She was one of those rare teachers who knew how to hold a room with silence before speaking. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "This is not a redo. It's not a trial. It's simply a chance to reflect." The room was tense at first. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Then a student from the communications department broke the ice. "I didn't say anything during the debate," she began, "but afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I clapped. I agreed with parts, but I also saw the look on one older gentleman's face in the back row. I think we forgot he was human." A few nods. Another student added, "We say we value inclusion, but I think we got caught up in a moment." "I know I did." Sophia sat with her hands folded in her lap. The tips of her fingers pressed hard into each other, leaving faint marks on her skin. For a moment, it looked like she would stay quiet. Then, she stood. The movement caught the room by surprise. One student near the edge muttered, just loud enough, "Here we go again." But Sophia didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace. She didn't posture. "I came here today because I owe this room something," she said. "An apology." A hush settled. "I believed what I said during the debate. And I still believe we need more voices in leadership. But I crossed a line. I didn't just argue for space, I argued to remove others from it." That wasn't principled. That was personal. She took a breath. When I was growing up, I had a father who never listened, who told me age meant he was always right, and I was always wrong. That stuck with me. It hardened me, and somewhere along the way, I started equating age with dominance, and dominance with oppression. She swallowed hard, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I turned my hurt into a weapon. I called it justice, but really, it was just revenge. That's not leadership, and it's not who I want to be. The silence in the room deepened. Even the sound of the coffee machine humming at the back seemed to dim. Sophia looked up, eyes scanning the group. To anyone who felt invisible because of what I said, to those who felt dismissed or devalued, I'm sorry. I used the language of progress to push people out. That's not progress. That's failure. There were no dramatic gasps. No immediate applause. Just a long, still moment. Then, Dr. W stepped forward, voice soft. Apologizing, she said, isn't weakness. It's the start of wisdom. Thank you. Sophia nodded once and sat down, her hands finally unclenching. The meeting went on for another 20 minutes. But it was clear the moment had shifted. Others shared more openly. Questions were raised about how campus culture could better hold space for disagreement without hostility. Barron never spoke. He listened, eyes calm, hands folded on his lap. After the meeting ended, people began drifting out. Some offered quiet smiles. A few students walked over to shake Sophia's hand. She responded with small, sincere nods, still unsure, but present. Barron waited until the room had mostly emptied before approaching her. She looked up as he neared. Uncertain. He extended a hand. Thanks for saying what you said, he said simply. Takes guts to own it. Sophia looked at him for a moment, then stood and took his hand. Thanks for holding me to a better standard, she replied. Neither smiled too wide. There was no grand reconciliation, but the gesture felt real. Someone snapped a photo. Just a blur of two students shaking hands in front of a whiteboard. Later that night, the photo would make its rounds on the campus message board. No captions, no hashtags, just the image. And behind them, in faint marker, someone had written the words from the closing of the meeting. Justice begins with listening. The Friday meeting was over, but its ripples were just beginning. By Monday morning, the photo of Barron and Sophia shaking hands had made its way onto nearly every student group chat and bulletin board on campus. Someone had added a caption in neat, typed font beneath it. Progress isn't loud, it listens first. No one claimed credit, but the image stuck. It was printed, reposted, even turned into a sticker on a few laptop covers. In one corner of the quad, a group of students who had once been Sophia's strongest supporters sat in a semicircle on the grass. They were organizing an open discussion. Taped flyers fluttering from lampposts. Free speech or harmful rhetoric? Where do we draw the line? The title had clearly been chosen with care. Sophia didn't attend, but she sent something instead, a single printed page folded in half. Delivered by hand just before the meeting began. The moderator read it aloud, hesitating for only a second at the name at the bottom. The greatest freedom, the note read, is the freedom to admit you were wrong. Back in the administration building, Barron received a formal invitation from the university president's office, asking him to speak at an upcoming faculty forum titled Student Voices in Academic Integrity. He replied politely, declining. I'm grateful, he wrote, but I believe doing the right thing should speak louder than explaining it. Later that afternoon, Barron headed to the library to return a stack of books. On his way out, he passed the west corner near the law journal shelves, where he spotted Sophia and Ethan seated across from each other. They weren't debating, they weren't arguing, they were just talking. Ethan glanced up first and offered a small nod. Sophia turned a beat later, her eyes meeting Barron's for a quiet moment. There was no need for words. The air between them wasn't cold anymore, just still. After Barron left, Ethan leaned forward across the table. You know, he said, I got a message after the debate. From Mr. Jennings, the older security guard over by the theater building. Sophia raised an eyebrow. The one who always wears that old Raiders jacket. Ethan smiled. Yeah, him, he wrote. First time in 30 years I've seen a student defend people like me. I almost cried. Sophia looked down, chewing the inside of her cheek. She didn't speak, But later, she pulled out a yellow legal pad from her bag. She started writing. Not a speech, not a slogan, a rebuttal to her own original argument. She titled it, Second Thoughts, A Personal Correction. And instead of citing abstract studies or psychological patterns, she listed names, people she'd walked past on campus, real faces, a janitor in the science hall who took night classes, a 62-year-old woman earning her degree in social work, the veteran professor who still spent his lunch hour tutoring freshmen. Her words were different this time, not combative, not absolute, but measured and reflective. Age, she wrote, is not a virtue or a flaw. It's a context, and judging someone by context alone is the fastest way to miss their character. Across campus, in the Student Life Center, Barron sat on a bench near the vending machines. An older student approached, someone rarely noticed in the rush between classes. She moved slowly, with a slight limp, using a cane painted with floral decals. Barron stood to make space for her. You don't know me, she said, but I wanted to say thank you. He blinked. For what? For reminding people that we're still part of this place. She said, I don't need to win every argument. I just want to be seen. Barron nodded, humbled. You are. She smiled and walked away, a little straighter than before. That evening, after the buildings had emptied and the sky had turned a quiet shade of violet, Sophia returned to the community board outside the student union. The same board that, not long ago, had held her campaign flyers, her slogans, her demands. She pinned something new. It was a printed copy of her rewritten essay, typed cleanly, 3 pages long. At the top, it read, submitted for anyone who's still willing to listen. At the bottom, where there once had been words like, remove, or, reject, a new sentence stood alone. I once used age to measure worth. I see now that character has no number. She stepped back, staring at her own words. For the first time in a long time, they felt honest. It started with a surprise. In the middle of a quiet Wednesday lecture, Professor Holloway, a respected faculty member in political theory, known for his calm demeanor and slow, thoughtful pacing, held up a stapled essay. I'd like to begin today's class, he said, with a piece written by one of your own. Sophia blinked from the third row. She hadn't seen this coming. Her breath caught when he began reading, not aloud, but slowly, out loud enough for the entire class to feel every pause. She knew the words. They were hers. The rewritten essay. The one she had pinned up on the student board. The one that had come not from a place of pride, but from a quiet place inside her that still stung with regret. Holloway stopped at the last line, looked up, and scanned the room. His eyes settled on her for a moment, but he didn't call her out. We often learn best, he said, voice steady, from the things we once believed were unquestionably true. There were no applause, no stares, just silence, the kind that isn't empty, but full of recognition. Later that day, Barron received another email. This one was from the statewide student conference committee. They were holding a summit on civil discourse in divided times, inviting student representatives from all across California. They wanted Barron to speak during the keynote panel on stage, microphone in hand. He replied with the same line he'd used before. I prefer to listen. But this time, he added one more sentence. I'll be there. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the Redwood campus, Sophia was leaving the library when someone stopped her just outside the west entrance. A senior she barely knew, tall, soft-voiced, dressed in faded jeans and a denim jacket. She introduced herself as Julia. My dad, Julia said, has voted red his entire life. He's loud about it, stubborn, thinks anything outside his world is a threat. Sophia furrowed her brow, unsure where this was going. He watched the video. Julia continued. The debate, the moment you froze when Barron spoke, and the way you changed after. He told me, maybe I've been talking too much and listening too little. There was a long pause. I've never heard him say anything like that before. Julia added. Sophia didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Julia smiled, patted her on the shoulder, and walked off. That night, Sophia found herself standing outside the Humanities Center, holding a manila folder. Inside was a fresh printout of her latest essay, with notes scribbled in the margins. Ideas she wasn't sure she'd ever share. But someone had to read it. She knocked on the door to the student council room. Barron was there, alone, flipping through an old university newsletter. "I brought something," she said, stepping inside, not to ask for forgiveness. Just, "I guess I owe the school. The people I hurt, a version of me that's trying to be better." He looked at her for a long moment, then took the folder and read the first page. It didn't take long. When he finished, he nodded slowly. "It's good," he said. Sophia looked away, as if bracing for criticism. "But don't let it stop here," he added. "Don't just write it, live it." They didn't talk much after that. The following week, a campus-wide contest was announced, the Listen and Respect Essay Challenge. The theme? The value of civil disagreement and what it means to grow beyond one's own beliefs. Sophia's story, though never named, became the case study. Not as a warning, but as a proof that even the most vocal minds can shift. That people can be more than their worst moments, if they choose to be. And then, one morning, they stood side by side again. Barron and Sophia entered the new university auditorium, where the statewide summit was being held. They weren't introduced as speakers, not as leaders, not as adversaries or cautionary tales. They were simply students, two people who had once stood on opposite ends of a sharp, painful divide. But today, they walked the same aisle, toward the same stage, not to fight, not to perform, but to witness what happens when conversation replaces condemnation. They took their seats near the back, and when the first speaker asked, "What does respectful debate look like?" Barron looked to his left. Sophia was already listening. The state conference had always been a formal affair, coats and name tags, filtered coffee in beige cups, panels with titles like Dialogue in a Divided Era and Bridging Generational Gaps. But this year felt different. Maybe it was the setting. Redwood's campus, wrapped in early fall sunlight, held a quiet kind of energy, the kind that comes after a storm, the kind that waits. Sophia and Barron were seated in the front row, side by side, their names printed neatly on small placards. No titles, no affiliations, just names. There were no whispers this time, no sneers or subtle glances, only stillness. The first speaker, a senior from a university up north, took the podium with an edge in his voice. "This institution," he said, gesturing toward the crowd, "is where a student once stood on stage and suggested that anyone over 50 should be stripped of voting rights. This happened in the name of progress. That isn't progress. That's prejudice." A murmur spread through the room. Sophia didn't flinch, but she didn't look away, either. The speaker pressed on, his tone sharpened by applause from a corner of the room. "If this is where we're headed, then the idea of civil dialogue is already dead." And then, the pause. Every eye shifted, first to the speaker, then to the front row. To Sophia. She rose slowly. The room hushed without being asked to. She didn't walk toward the microphone. She simply turned where she stood and addressed the hall. Voice clear but calm. "I was that student," she said. Silence. She waited a beat, long enough for the words to land. "And I was wrong." Her tone didn't tremble, but it softened. The armor she once wore so naturally, righteous anger, confident certainty, was gone. "I was angry, yes, but more than that, I was afraid. Afraid of becoming what I hated. I thought I was challenging power. But in truth, I was becoming another version of it." She let her gaze move across the room, never lingering too long in one place. "What changed me wasn't being shouted down or shut out. It was someone choosing not to shout back. Someone who spoke truth without cruelty. And a community that gave me space to see myself. Not as the voice of a generation, but as a student still learning." Sophia drew a breath, slow and even. "I'm not here to defend my past words. I'm here because I was forgiven, even when I didn't deserve it. And because I learned that dialogue isn't about winning, it's about witnessing. About being changed by the people we thought we'd never understand." She sat down. No applause followed, not right away. Only a silence that felt earned. The earlier speaker didn't rise again. His notes stayed untouched. Barron hadn't moved during the exchange. But at the first break, as people filtered out into the hallway for coffee and soft pretzels, a student from a university in Nevada approached him. She was young, probably first year, wearing a button that said, "Speak loud. Live free." I used to hate you, she said, eyes not hostile, just honest. Because of your last name. Because of who your family is. Barron nodded, saying nothing. But watching this, she continued, watching how you didn't try to clear your name or make it about you. I realized something. Character doesn't come with a birth certificate. It comes with what you choose to stand for. Every day. Barron offered a quiet smile. She walked away. Later, over lukewarm coffee, a professor from UCLA shared something with Sophia. After that debate, he said, we saw a spike. 50 students signed up for the intergenerational learning program. We've never had more than 7 in one semester. Sophia blinked. 50? They said they wanted to hear from people who'd lived longer than they had. Said they didn't want to just read about history anymore. They wanted to feel it breathe. The final panel closed with a standing ovation. Not for a person but for the theme, radical listening. As the conference dispersed and the sun dipped low over the hills, Barron and Sophia stepped out of the auditorium side by side. No one stopped them for selfies. No one clapped, but a few heads turned. Not in fame, in something quieter, respect. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sophia glanced sideways. Feels different, doesn't it? Barron tilted his head. What does? Being heard without shouting. He gave a half shrug. Then a small nod. They kept walking. No more cameras. No more microphones. Just 2 students, who once stood on opposite ends, now walking in the same direction. Carried by the weight of silence that finally meant something. A breeze moved through the redwood courtyard that morning, stirring the edges of a student-run newspaper pinned to the community board. Its headline, printed in bold across the top, read, "From debate to dialogue, when students learn to listen." Below it, a photo of the packed auditorium. 2 silhouettes stood in front of a faded screen. No podium. No spotlight. Just presence. Sophia saw it on her way to the student center. She didn't stop to read the full article. She didn't need to. The title alone felt enough. Later that day, an email from the dean's office landed in her inbox. We would be honored if you'd contribute to our upcoming edition of the Redwood Review. It read, Topic: Critical Thinking and Emotional Responsibility. She stared at the screen for a moment. Then, without overthinking it, she clicked reply. I'd be glad to, but I'd like to invite Barron Trump as co-author. When Barron got her message, he almost thought it was a mistake. But it wasn't. It was short, sincere, and with no embellishments. I don't know if I've earned that yet, he had replied. To which Sophia responded, Neither have I. That's why we write it together. They met under one of the old elm trees by the library. Just as the afternoon sun filtered through. Laptops closed for now. Just the beginnings of conversation. Barron leaned back on the bench. We're not writing to explain away what happened. Sophia nodded. Right, he continued. We're writing to remind people we were wrong. That we were quiet when we should have spoken. And when we did speak, we didn't always get it right. But we learned. That's the part that matters. She didn't respond at first. Just stared ahead at a group of freshmen tossing a frisbee on the quad. Then, almost under her breath, it's strange how being wrong feels more powerful than being right, when you know what to do with it. Meanwhile, in a different corner of campus, a reporter from the university radio station was interviewing Noah, an older student with a mobility aid. The same student who once told Barron, "You made us feel seen." On air, Noah said, after watching that debate, I stopped being quiet. Last week, when a professor made a joke about accommodations being luxuries, I raised my hand. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. And I wouldn't have, if I hadn't seen others stand up for people like me. The segment went viral within campus channels. Elsewhere, a proposal from the Humanities Club landed on the faculty council's desk. Proposal to create an elective titled Intergenerational Dialogue. Inspired by the Redwood debate, faculty meetings, usually dry and slow, buzzed with something new, not agreement, necessarily, but curiosity, engagement. The same day, in the quiet of her dorm room, Sophia opened an email from her father. They hadn't spoken much in recent years. Not since their arguments had gone from heated to silent. The subject line was blank. She hesitated before opening it. It read, I once thought I failed as a father because I raised a daughter who saw the world so differently from me. But now I realize you weren't lost, you were searching. And today, I'm proud, not because you were right, but because you knew when to stop, turn around, and choose another path. There was no signature, just the space left behind when someone says exactly what they mean. That evening, Barron and Sophia finally sat down to begin their article. The opening paragraph took longer than expected, not because they were unsure of what to say, but because they both wanted to get it right. At the end of the night, after walking out of the library, they passed the old brick wall behind the student union. Once used for flyers, it had become a quiet canvas over the years. And now, it held something new. In careful white paint, words stretched across the bricks. Tolerance is not weakness. It is the strength that keeps truth from becoming a weapon. Below the line, in small, almost shy lettering, were the initials, S and B. No one took credit, but no one needed to. Some truths didn't need signatures. They just needed to be heard. The first day of the new academic year at Redwood came with a kind of quiet energy. Sunlight stretched lazily across the campus lawn, where first-year students gathered in clusters, some squinting at maps, others flipping through the newly printed student handbook. Inside its front cover, bold against a white background, sat a quote: "Freedom is not the loudest voice in the room. It's the space we hold for each other to be heard." Beneath it, two names: Sophia Keller, Barron Trump. Most new students didn't know the full story behind it, not yet. But some would ask. Some already had. Sophia, now a teaching assistant in the Social Conflict and Communication course, walked the hallway with a different air about her. It wasn't confidence in the traditional sense. It was steadiness, like someone who had learned to carry weight without letting it crush her. In her class, students leaned in. Some had once dismissed her, even mocked her. Now, they scribbled down her thoughts, raised hands not to challenge, but to understand. After a lecture, one sophomore approached her shyly. "I used to think you were the angry one," he admitted. Sophia smiled, not defensive, just honest. "I was." He blinked, surprised. "But I'm learning," she added. "That anger without reflection is just noise." Across campus, Barron kept his quiet rhythm. He had accepted a research fellowship focusing on generational policy and inclusive governance. His name came up often in discussions, but he rarely joined the room. A professor once asked him, offhandedly in the corridor, "You think you won that debate?" Barron looked up from the notes in his hand, gave a small smile. "I don't know about winning," he said, "but I've noticed fewer people eating lunch alone." One morning in a freshman seminar, a student interrupted a discussion by mocking a senior professor's age, dismissing his points as outdated thinking from a different century. The room tensed, but before the professor could reply, a second-year student sitting in the back stood up and calmly said, "You don't have to agree, but don't insult people just because they're older." No yelling, no spotlight, just presence. Later, someone mentioned the student had watched last year's campus debate online, twice. Meanwhile, Professor Williams, who had once placed a gentle hand on Sophia's shoulder during her lowest moment, organized a panel titled, "When Debate Becomes a Bridge." Sophia and Barron were invited to speak together, for the first time. Not as opposing voices, but as co-narrators of the same story. The small auditorium filled fast. Students from various programs came, some dragging their roommates along. A few professors stood quietly in the back, observing. When they took the stage, Sophia glanced at Barron. "No scripts?" she whispered. "Just scars," he replied, almost lighthearted. They didn't rehearse a performance. They told a story, about mistakes, about voices, about listening not to argue, but to understand, and how neither of them had planned to change anything, but something changed anyway. After the panel, a group of students from a visiting college requested an interview. "We're writing a paper on what people are calling the Redwood effect." One of them explained, "It's about how one confrontation reshaped intergenerational dynamics on campus." Barron looked at Sophia and chuckled. "Redwood effect. Sounds too grand." "Maybe," she said, "but I've seen stranger things start smaller." As the evening settled, the crowd dispersed. Laughter lingered in the hallways. Soft and honest, Sophia waved goodbye to the last student and turned to find Barron still inside. Standing near the now empty stage, he was staring at the podium. The same one she once used to deliver a speech that echoed across the state, for better and for worse. His arms were folded, his expression unreadable. "Thinking of saying something again?" she asked. Walking up beside him, he didn't look away from the podium, just thinking how a few words can either burn a bridge or build one. She leaned against the edge of the stage. "Maybe next time, we teach them how to ask the right questions before they jump to conclusions." He finally looked at her, calm but firm, and how to say sorry before the damage spreads too far to fix. A long pause stretched between them, not awkward but full, like something settling into place. Outside the window, the evening light dimmed to gold, spilling across the floor like a quiet promise that this year, this time, might begin a little differently. The studio was small, just 2 mics, a round table, and the gentle hum of a ceiling fan overhead, but to the students producing Redwood's first campus podcast, it felt like a stage that reached far beyond the walls. Episode 1 dropped under the title, "When Age Stops Being a Barrier." Their first guests weren't celebrities or scholars, just 2 former students whose names still lingered in the footnotes of campus lore, Sophia Keller and Barron Trump. They sat side by side, not as symbols, but simply as people who had lived through something together and came out changed. The host leaned in and asked, "What do you think made that debate matter so much?" Sophia paused, letting the silence stretch naturally before answering. "Because it started with anger," she said, "but it didn't end in silence." Barron smiled softly. "Because we weren't trying to beat each other. We just didn't want to lose ourselves." The moment sat with the room a while. Then the episode took its course, filled with laughter, reflection, and the kind of stories that made both guests seem more human than historical. What they didn't expect was how far the conversation would ripple. Weeks later, a liberal arts college on the East Coast launched a writing contest titled Bridging Generational Gaps. The prompt? A quote from Barron, scrawled across the flyer. "Sometimes we speak not to be right, but to remember who we are when we're wrong." One of the submissions came from a student who hadn't spoken to her grandfather in 5 years. Her entry ended with this line, "Your story helped me knock on his door again." Back at Redwood, the community prepared to say goodbye to Professor Williams, the senior faculty member who had once stood quietly behind Sophia with a hand on her shoulder. And later, helped shape the course that changed how students saw each other. At his retirement reception, they handed him a large framed photograph, Barron and Sophia shaking hands beneath the words that once sparked fire and now healing. Under the photo was a small inscription. "There is no old generation or new, just people willing to meet each other halfway." Sophia packed her things into 2 small boxes, her office now almost bare. A new offer had come, assistant director of a nonprofit program connecting youth with seniors across the state. She didn't hesitate. It felt right. She left Redwood with her mistakes and her lessons packed together. Not hidden, just held. Barron, too, was on the move. He had accepted a spot in a graduate program focused on community policy and restorative justice. But before he left, he slipped into the library, his quiet refuge since the beginning, and taped a letter to the inside of the reading nook wall. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just waiting to be found. "If you're angry," it read, "ask yourself, what exactly are you angry at? And is there a way to change that, by being kind instead of cruel?" The ink was steady. The message wasn't about him. It was for whoever came next. On the community board by the student lounge, the same one where years ago someone had posted the flyer that launched it all, a new message appeared. Written in white chalk on a faded wooden plank. No signature, no announcement, just a single sentence. "Silence can be complicity, but a voice that listens is the beginning of justice." In the end, this wasn't just a clash of opinions, it was a reminder that true strength lies not in silencing others, but in listening, questioning, and growing. When we stop seeing people as enemies and start seeing them as fellow learners, something powerful happens. What about you? Have you ever changed your mind after truly hearing someone out? If stories like this inspire you, don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Secrets for more powerful moments where truth, courage, and understanding collide. Let's keep the conversation going.